A monument is some sort of commemoration. You see all sorts of architectural monuments around the world reminding us of some important event or honoring, important people or times or places. Now, most occurrences where a monument is put up is something that's well thought out and designed. Some monuments are the most artistic and beautiful things that human hands have ever crafted. Monuments all over, for example, Rome today from past history. Places like Paris, full of monuments. London, full of monuments. Washington, D.C., all over the world, right? But there are some monuments that are inadvertent commemorations that were never designed, were never crafted by human hands, and yet can be more powerful than anything we put together to remind us of the past. One of those inadvertent monuments is said to exist in southern Russia. One of the people who visited this inadvertent monument is an author named Donovan Webster, who wrote a book called Aftermath. But the most haunting part of Donovan Webster's book is when he takes, several planes and a bunch of cars to get to this spot in the middle of nowhere on the steppes of southern Russia to see something that very few people know is there, especially outside of Russia. And he says he had a guide with him, and they pulled the car up to this spot, and it was in the middle of a very flat plain, and you could see way off into the distance, all the way to the horizon, miles away. And he says that he and the guide got out of the car, their boots crunching on the snow-filled field, and the guide told him to look down. And Webster says when his eyes adjusted to the blinding white of the snow and the plains and everything, he could make out strange shapes in the snow. And the guide picked up one of these shapes and showed it to Webster. And it was a bone. A human bone. And he and Webster begin walking around this field, picking up clavicles and thigh bones and jaw bones and pieces of skulls, and they are everywhere. He says there are also jack boots that you come across and all sorts of leather gear, all the refuse and debris of human existence that you might imagine still sitting around this field. And he says you can look off into the horizon and these bones are sticking up out of the snow as far as you can see for miles. This bone field is a monument, an inadvertent commemoration of an important event with many, many, many lessons to teach modern-day people today. And it's out in the middle of nowhere. These skeletons lying on this bone field that Webster was picking up out of the snow are the remains of Hitler's Wehrmacht. And this was the breakwater that the tide of Nazi expansion broke against before it began to recede back to the borders of Germany. And in a very strange thing to say, it's probably good that those 300,000 people died. They are a human reminder of the cost of evil. Imagine how different our world might be today had that army not been defeated outside of Stalingrad in what must have been a cavalcade of human suffering. Here's the thing, though. Those 300,000 human beings who lay on the steppes of modern-day Russia were not all evil. Many of them were simply pawns of an evil regime, and many of those people fighting in that army that suffered massively and died at that spot could have been you and could have been me had we been born in a different time and a different place. They were pawns of evil for the most part. And here's what makes this story so difficult to tell. The people who killed them were also pawns of evil. You see, if you took the Eastern Front, as it was called, in the Second World War, the war between Nazi Germany and the Communist Soviet Union, if you took that out of the greater scheme of World War II and just looked at it by itself, it would be the largest war in human history. The Eastern Front was more costly and larger than the whole First World War was. It was a titanic struggle, an immense conflict that ate up lives at a pace that is unimaginable. And it's a very difficult story to tell also because it's very recent. When you talk about the struggles between Rome and Carthage, or the ancient wars between Greece and Persia, they're just too far in the past. The ideologies don't matter anymore. The suffering of the peoples is obscure and remote. But there are people who are going to listen to this program who can look at their arms and see the tattoos from the death camps that they used to be in. It's hard to have an objective look at things when you're so close to them. And to talk about the suffering of the people who were the pawns in the story is also difficult, because there are a lot of people who think that the suffering is deserved, and it's not hard to understand. There's some truth to that. Just like there's some truth that it's a good thing that there are 300,000 dead Germans, along with Italian allies and Romanian allies and Hungarian allies and Bulgarian allies on those plains of southern Russia now. But that doesn't negate the fact that those were human beings, and that this is a story with lessons. And one of the main lessons is that those people were victims of a government and an ideology. The 300,000 or so skeletons lying on the Russian steppe right now is a commemoration, an inadvertent monument, saying, here's what happens when governments get out of control and evil individuals run amok unchecked. And this is a story about a war with victims on all sides.
December 7th,
It's history.
1941,
The events.
a date which will
The
live
drama.
in
The
infamy.
figures.
This was our vice power.
It's hardcore history.